Chapter is a Welcome to Walk in the Park. My name is Tony Ingram, and this is October 24th, 2018. If you want to see all my episodes of Walk in the Park, you can go to my website at walkinthepark.tv. That's a URL. This is a public access television show in Ithaca, New York, Channel 13. You can go on pegasus.webstarts.com and see our schedule of all our series. We're going to go right now to the northern end of Cayuga Lake, just north of Cayuga Lake in the center part of the Finger Lakes of upstate New York, to the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. And we're going to speak with Andrea Van Beusichem, who is the Visitor Services Manager, in this illustrated interview. So we'll go right to the Visitor Center deck, I should say, where folks are looking at birds at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. Okay, I'm standing here with Andrea Van Beusichem. Get that right? Yes.
Get it right.
Yeah, okay. She's the Visitor Services Manager for the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge north of Cayuga Lake. So tell us a little bit about the refuge.
So Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge is one of over 560 refuges across the nation. Refuges are run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under the Department of the Interior, and we're responsible for managing lands and waters for the conservation of migratory birds, threatened and endangered species, and migratory fish.
Mm-hmm. Migratory fish. I didn't know you had migratory. Well, are there migratory fish here?
There aren't migratory fish at Montezuma, but there are in other parts of the country. So fish that use salt water and fresh water in their life cycle, that's the kind of fish like the American eel, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what are the principal species of wildlife that you, or classes or whatever, wildlife that the Montezuma Refuge is here for?
So at Montezuma, we're mainly managing for migratory birds because we don't have any federally threatened or endangered species on the refuge since the bald eagle came off of the federally threatened and endangered species list. So migratory birds that we manage for, we are largely a wetland, so we're having ducks, geese, marsh birds like herons and grebes and terns, that those things nest here. We have shorebirds that will migrate through. We do have a growing population of bald eagles, so that's very exciting. That's one kind of highlight that people come to visit to see the bald eagles. We do have a lot of grassland nesting birds that are also important species of concern and things like that that we can manage our different areas for.
So this series of wetlands is vitally important for the welfare and the survival of the populations of waterfowl and shorebirds and so forth that pass through here. Is that right?
Montezuma is vitally important for the migratory birds that pass through here. We have some that just use it as a resting area, resting and feeding, and then others will migrate to here for nesting. We've been designated by Audubon as an important bird area. When you combine Montezuma and what you have to offer here with the other national wildlife refuges and open green spaces throughout the Atlantic Flyway, then you've really got something big and crucial for the survival of wildlife.
So tell me what the Atlantic Flyway is.
Well, since we're at Montezuma and we have the New York State Thruway passing right through the middle of the refuge.
Right up there, yeah.
We like to kind of liken it to the New York State Thruway. It's really a migration highway, and along that highway there are places to stop and rest and refuel, and that's exactly what Montezuma and other places along the Flyway do.
Okay, so why was the refuge created?
So in 1938, Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge was established as a result of some changes to the landscape that had happened in the earlier 1900s. So the Cayuga-Seneca barge canal was created to connect Cayuga and Seneca lakes to the Erie Canal system. And when that happened, the hydrology of the area, or the way that the water flowed and behaved over the land, changed, and the historic marshes that were here drained. Now, we have seen reports from missionaries and explorers and people who were here early on in time that talked about the skies blackening out with birds and the forests abounding with deer. And when you lose the water, generally the life goes with it. So people were concerned at that time about the environment. And in 1903, Theodore Roosevelt established the first National Wildlife Refuge. And, many were created beyond that time. And so it was a time for that in the nation. So the Civilian Conservation Corps, which was a group of young men going around the country working at labor projects, they came here and built the dike around what we now call our main pool, and started the refuge just like that. And we've done, from 1938 until today, we purchase land that's available for sale and turn it into viable, healthy wildlife habitat.
So this is part of something that's called the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, isn't it? And there's other partners and other state and otherwise that are participating in a much larger area. What's the acreage, for instance, of the refuge at this time?
Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge is 10,000 acres, and we are part of the greater Montezuma Wetlands Complex, which is a partnership between the refuge, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, the Friends of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex, it's a support group, Ducks Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, and Audubon, New York. So we have the Montezuma Audubon Center to the north of us in Savannah, New York. In this partnership, we manage our area. The state has about 10,000 acres as well, and there's a 50,000 acre acquisition boundary. So that means we can purchase land within that 50,000 acres. The refuge knows which lands they would be able to buy, and the state knows which lands they would buy in order to restore those lands to habitat. We also work very closely together as biologists to have a comprehensive idea of what's happening with our habitats, because the birds don't recognize our boundaries, right? And then we work closely with the Montezuma Audubon Center to provide programming, especially for school groups and homeschool groups and scouts. So they have the expertise and the staff there to accommodate larger groups and programming.
What do you see as the future of the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge?
It's amazing to see the people of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and especially the refuge system, not just the staff but the volunteers, are so dedicated that you put in over 100% to doing your job, which generally everybody loves their job. So it's more than that, right? It's more than our job, it's a passion. So we put in a lot of work and time in order to keep the progress going that we work every day to move along in wildlife management. With some of the more and more cuts that come to our budgets, we have to prioritize and decide what do we have to do, what would we like to do that we can do, and what do we have to say no to at this time. and that's always a hard decision to make, but we do know that national wildlife refuges are established for wildlife first. So that's our mantra. Whatever we do has got to benefit the wildlife. And so even with some constraints, the lands are protected, and whatever happens socially, the birds still come. So, whatever might be going on in the world around us, the birds still come. And it's just their cycle and the strength of nature, I think, that's what happens. And so there's always people who come, and citizens who come to help and to visit and appreciate. So the future, even though it might be a time where we trudge through here and there, I still think it's bright for Montezuma and other natural areas and wildlife refuges.
Well, you do have a friends group, right? Tell me about that.
We do have a friends group. It's the Friend of the Montezuma Wetlands Complex.
Oh.
So they're friends of the entire partnership, and they support refuge projects, state conservation projects, and the Audubon, their outreach and education. There's a membership fee that helps contribute to some of the projects that we like to do here. They have an annual Montezuma Muck Race, which is a 24-hour birdathon, and the competitors raise funds to go towards certain projects within the complex. And we also, so many of our friends are volunteers, so they're not just raising funds, but they're here on the ground in the visitor center, out in the field with our biologists on heavy equipment as we're restoring areas. So it is great to have support outside of our own staff.
So there's opportunities, obviously, for people who are really interested in the refuge and its mission to get involved and actually hands-on do some things to help out the refuge and the wildlife that you're here for.
We have year-round opportunities for people to come and help out and volunteer. So we always need help in the visitor center and the nature store. So if you like to do customer service and interact with people, that's a great option. We have our Marsh Volunteer Program. That's the Montezuma Alliance for the Restoration of Species and Habitats, and we actually have volunteer forces that help us battle invasive species and also restore some of our lands by collecting seeds or doing plantings and things like that, aside from the pulling of the invasive plants. We also have volunteers who mow the lawn. We have volunteers who do all of these maintenance projects that we maybe couldn't get to, replacing a board on the deck or collecting the garbage or reconfiguring our hunter check station. So there's certainly opportunity for many skills, and occasionally we'll find somebody who is skilled at running heavy equipment like excavators and bulldozers and diskers, things like that, where we use those kinds of machinery for the restoration. So out behind us is all man-made, and we need the heavy equipment in order to do that. So when you find somebody with that skill, it's a little rare, but very helpful.
So this is more than a preserve. This is an area that's managed for the benefit of the migratory, well, it's also nesting, managed for the birds that depend upon it in the different stages of their life.
So Montezuma is actively managed for the wildlife, the birds, and other animals that live here. So when I give a tour, I like to point out to people how natural and naturey it seems, but discuss with them how we do work every day to keep it like this. So when you drive around our marshes, and we call them pools, when you drive around our pools or go, view over looking a pool, it does look very natural, but we have water control structures on every pool, so we can change the water level as we need to according to the habitat needs. We do mowing and prescribed fire in our grasslands to help manage them. We use equipment to I like to think of it as the cartoon where you see like a big shaver kind of shaving an area of trees or something. We do something similar to that in our shrublands when they need to be cut down a bit so they can come back and stay as a shrubland rather than move into a forest habitat. Right. So yeah, there's a lot that happens over the days and the seasons in order to keep Montezuma habitat usable and useful for the migratory birds especially, but the other wildlife that's here as well.
What are some of the other wildlife that are here besides the migratory birds?
We have resident species of birds in addition to the migratory birds. So our bald eagles are actually residents. They stay here year-round. Things like cardinals and blue jays and other birds that you see all around the year, they're here. We have mammals like beaver, muskrats, deer, coyote, red fox, mink, which I think is really neat. Yeah. And occasionally we see river otter, and I think that's really neat too. Wow. Yeah. And of course so many small mammals, rabbits, squirrels, chipmunks, other rodents like that. Yeah. Of course there are snakes and turtles and frogs and the American toad as well. So it's the way that Montezuma has been formed over the years is to provide a diversity of habitats, and that brings a diversity of wildlife. And that's always the healthier situation in nature.
In fact, some of the pools that you have, like out here in the main pool and some of the other pools, sometimes you have water in them and sometimes you don't. What are you managing for when you change the water levels?
I believe our water management is sometimes a mystery to people because they can come one day and there will be pools up full of water, and then they'll come another time and there won't be water in that pool. And that's always so thoughtfully and purposefully done for our management. So we have some small pools that we manage as shorebird migration management areas. So the pool around our visitor center deck is a shorebird management area. After the spring waterfowl migration, we'll drain the shorebird management areas and just let them dry up. So plants naturally will grow over the summer. That's the growing season. So in late summer and early fall, as long as it hasn't been too wet, we can get heavy equipment in, mow, and then disc the areas. So that turns the plant growth under and the bare soil up to the surface. Then we just pump a little bit of water. We call it a sheet of water, so just a very shallow bit to create a mud flat. And it's really just kind of like a shallow mud puddle, but the shorebirds come and they feed in those areas. So they pick through the mud and the shallow water for insects and other invertebrates. That's their feeding areas. Once the shorebird migration is over, sometime in October, we fill those pools back up with water and allow them to be habitat for the migratory waterfowl. Some of our larger pools, we manage the water for a different purpose, and we will completely drain an area in order to refresh the marsh. So most of the marshes that we've created at Montezuma are emergent marshes, and they will naturally go through open water to a dry kind of drought cycle situation. So if you start out with an open water situation, it's a big area that's shallow water, about a couple feet deep, but that looks like a big lake. Well, there isn't a lot of useful habitat in that situation for the birds that we're managing for. They need some more vegetation for food and for cover, so hiding and shelter areas. So at that point we know to drain the marsh and let the plants naturally regrow. And then we do that after the spring migration, and then before the fall migration, we will fill the pool up if we have that capability. Some of our pools we have to rely on rain to refill them. But they generally do get enough water in them for the wildlife needs and in time for the fall migration. Over time, the plants will die off just because of natural senescence or old age. They just die naturally. And then also, I mean, muskrats will use cattails and other things. They'll eat them or make their muskrat houses. And so that starts to open up some of the plant areas. Our optimum situation is when there's 50% open water and 50% plants in a marsh, and it's scattered around. It's never like a pie and half is plants and half is water. It's scattered around. Right. And that's the optimal situation for the habitat for the waterfowl and marsh nesting birds.
You have an amazing story about the restoration of bald eagles that I think began here at Montezuma back in the 70s.
The bald eagle is sort of an icon, I think, for the Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge and the Montezuma area. And there really is a great bald eagle story to go along with that honor, I guess. So most people know that the bald eagle populations drastically declined in the 1960s because of the use of the chemical DDT, which is a pesticide. So DDT concentrates in the tissues of the organisms that absorb it. So by the time the eagles got to eat the fish that they were hunting for, those fish had concentrations of DDT in them. And so then it became incorporated into the bald eagle system, and it affected the success of their eggs. Sometimes it would just weaken their eggshells and they would break, or they would be so porous that they didn't have the right conditions where they would be able to hatch. So the population plummeted because bald eagles don't have their nests until they're 4 or 5 years old. So that's a long time from when you're born for wildlife, or when you're born to when you reproduce. And so it really contributed to the decline. So in 1976, actually, biologists from the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation designed, in partnership with us, but they largely designed a bald eagle reintroduction program here at Montezuma. So they went to an area above our Shockey Pool, a high ridge looking over the marsh, and they built 2 towers high on the ridge and put cages on top of the towers. And they received young bald eagles from other parts of the country and basically raised them with the help of our refuge staff and volunteers and other state biologists. We raised eagles, and every eagle got a band with a number, kind of like our social security numbers. They would get a band telling us who they were and where they were from and all of that. And we raised and released 20-some bald eagles here at Montezuma before they moved the whole operation to the Oak Orchard Management Area and near the Iroquois National Wildlife Refuge between Rochester and Buffalo. Right. And they raised and released 20-some more bald eagles at that location. Well, so that was the rest of the 1970s. In 1986, a farmer came into our refuge office and told the biologist that he saw a big nest out there. And so they went to investigate it, and it certainly was a big nest, and it was an eagle nest with eaglets in it. The interesting thing about that, besides, oh my gosh, here's an eagle nest after all of these years, is that it was being tended by 3 adult bald eagles, 2 males and a female. So that's not really a natural, that doesn't happen all of the time in nature. That's kind of a rare, unusual occurrence.
Yeah.
We do know that the males came from our reintroduction program because they had the band on their leg. We don't know where the female came from because she was not banded, so she just showed up. And, so we call them the trio, and they had mostly successful nests over the years from 1986 when we found them, up until somewhat recently when we think possibly the female died and a new female stepped in, and we really can't tell because she's not banded, but people who were very attached to those eagles and paid a close attention to them noticed different behavior between the 3, and so we think maybe the female changed. And still those males are still having successful nests even today. 1986 was our first nest after the reintroduction. Another nest showed up not long after that, and then I think it was many years until 2006 or so that the 3rd nest, bald eagle nest, appeared on the refuge. Today, in 2018, we have about 6 active bald eagle nests.
Wow.
It's so exciting. And so it's so neat then to be here and see the amazing conservation success with their recovery program, and to know that they're no longer federally threatened or endangered.
Okay, I just want to add one more photo credit there. Bill Hecht provided the aerial photograph of the refuge and so forth. So that's the end of our show. I want to thank you for joining me. Take a visit up to the visitor center at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge. I think they're open from 8 or 9 till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So thanks for joining me. Turn off this screen sometime and go out for a walk in the park. We'll end with this photograph of the trio by Doug Racine while we get back to our goodbye credits here. Is a